everyone, this is John Daly. I'm here again with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How's it going today, Bernie?
Just fine, John.
Good, good. So we're about 2 weeks out from the midterms. We now know that the GOP will have a very narrow House majority come January. We also know that they lost the Senate majority for the second time in 2 years, as well as some big governors' races. We talked about the causes of all this quite a bit in the last episode of the No BS Zone. But Bernie, now that we're seeing the full picture and where everything stands, do you have any new thoughts on the midterms?
No, I think there are times when you have to state the obvious, and this is one of those times. Uh, the issues favored Republicans: inflation, crime, the mess on the southern border, our crazy woke culture, and yet it was a debacle for the Republican Party. And the reason mainly, not entirely, but mainly was Donald Trump. Even though voters sided with Republicans on the issues, they couldn't get past candidates who were clinging to the delusion that the 2020 election was stolen. So if there's a takeaway, and it's obvious, but let's state it and move on. If there's a takeaway, it's that if you continue to hold on to this crazy story that the 2020 election was stolen, that Joe Biden is not a legitimate president, that is a loser's game, period.
Now, it's interesting because there has been some data analysis now of the midterms, and it was what you're saying is exactly right. Trump's preferred candidates underperformed other Republican candidates by roughly 5 points, which in many cases was a make or break spread. But one thing I'm sort of surprised about, and maybe I don't know if you are as well, for all of these stop the steal candidates that lost in the midterms, I think other than Kerry Lake, all of them actually conceded their races, which was nice. I was kind of surprised by that. Did you notice that as well?
John, I'm tempted to say, John. If you're willing to accept that that's progress,
I'll take whatever I can get, Bernie. I'll take whatever I can get.
an American politician acknowledging that he lost an election, if that's progress, we are in bigger trouble than even I thought.
I know, but my bar is so low for this stuff at this point. I was honestly expecting all of these people to deny that they lost. Again, Kerry Lake did, which I guess that shouldn't have been a surprise. But yeah, no, I realized it's baby steps, but it was it was good to see regardless.
Well, as I say, if we've gone that far where we give credit, I know you did this tongue in cheek, but if we're
Yeah,
giving
not so much credit, just
to
surprise.
a candidate who lost an election, and we're saying, that's a good thing. We are in big trouble.
I agree. I agree. So now, speaking of Donald Trump, last week the former president announced his third run now for presidency. He's the first candidate to do so far for the 2024 election. I think there's a few interesting parts to the story: the presidential run itself, the timing of his announcement, and also the reaction his announcement received. It was a little different than last time. Bernie, what are your thoughts on the future of one Donald J. Trump?
Well, I'm going to say something very directly. I'm not bashing him when I say this. I think I'm just analyzing the situation correctly. Donald Trump is a loser. He's a 4-time loser. He lost in 2018. He lost the House for his party. He lost the presidency in 2020. He lost the Senate in 2021 by going down to Georgia, and instead of campaigning for the two Republican candidates, he said you can't trust Georgia state officials because they didn't overturn the election that he says he won. And a lot of Trump voters sat home, and we got two progressive Democrats in Georgia. So he lost those three, and now he lost, largely responsible for losing the midterm elections. I say losing. A 1 or 2 seat or 3 seat majority in the House is not a victory. Let's get that on the record. So he's a 4-time loser. A vote for Donald Trump you would think is a vote for a Democratic president. Not necessarily. As I've written in my column that went up this week on Monday, every time I've counted him out, I was wrong. Every single time I thought he was finished, I was wrong. So this time around, if he wins the nomination, and I want to talk about that in a second, who do the Democrats have? They have nobody. Joe Biden's not running. That's the only prediction I've made since my ill-fated prediction that Donald Trump wouldn't even run in 2016. I stopped making predictions after that. Joe Biden's not running. Kamala Harris, I could run against Kamala Harris and become the president. They have a
Do
thin.
it.
So if Donald Trump wins the nomination, even though everything tells you he's a loser, he'll lose again. I'm not sure. I'm not betting on that. Now, here's what I am troubled by and worried by. Let's say other candidates, Republican candidates, have the guts to jump into the race, figuring Donald Trump is weakened and he can be had. And there, let's say, to use around number 10 candidates on the platform during the debate. 9 of them split the vote and Donald Trump gets his 20 or 30% and wins the nomination, just like he did in 2016. Here we go again. Here we go again. That's why I would hope the Republicans who run, who, if they don't do well early on, drop out. Just drop out. Make it a 2-man race, at most a 3-man race, and move on from there. One other thing. Mike Pompeo, a bright guy, put out a tweet over the weekend that said, you know, we hear that we're going to be so tired of winning. Well, I'm tired of losing. Now, it was a clear reference to Donald Trump because he said you're going to be so tired of winning, you'll have enough winning. Well, no, we've had enough losing with Donald Trump. But Mike Pompeo didn't have the courage to say Donald Trump's name in the tweet. They're still afraid to take on Donald Trump. The one candidate who isn't, and I give him a lot of credit, I don't think he could win the nomination, but he'd get my vote, is Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey. He says, if you want to move on, if you want to have a Republican president in 2024, you have to take on Donald Trump. You have to take him on directly. You have to name him by name, and you have to tell his voters, yes, he did a lot of good things, and go through the issues that they like, and he should get credit for it. And then say he can't win, and convince them to drop him, because it isn't Donald Trump who baffles me anymore. I get him. I don't like what I get, but I get him. It's the 20 or 30% that stick with him and still think he's the Messiah. They, as long as they stick with him, there's going to be problems for the Republican Party.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with Christie. He has been stronger than the others, at least ones that are talking about getting into the race. You've seen some stuff from Mike Pence too, where he'll throw out some, again, sort of subtle jabs at Trump. He's definitely not ready to take him on fully yet. I think Ron DeSantis is sort of playing his cards pretty tight right now. He's not coming out. He doesn't really need to at this point either, I don't think, in his position as the governor. But at some point, I think, like you said, these people are going to have to come out, and they are going to have to walk a bit of a tightrope. One thing I wanted to mention was, I thought sort of interesting about all this was the timing. I felt to come out this time so early, right on the heels, Trump's announcement, right on the heels of the midterm spanking the GOP received. You wonder. To me, that sort of felt like a little bit desperate. I know it was probably more to do with him just wanting to get out there and become part of the story. But I wonder if it's part of it is that he is sort of worried about losing the steam that he used to have, and also I wonder if he's sort of potentially looking at these serious legal challenges, including from Georgia, the possible election tampering, the federal investigation into the top secret documents. Do you think there's a chance he sort of got in there so he could then declare that these investigations are political and that they're trying to stop him from running? And you think they would that they would, somehow this would run cover for him as far as his legal challenges go?
I absolutely believe that. I think that's the biggest single reason that he announced almost 2 years in advance. He's trying to get ahead of these investigations. It obviously isn't going to work. They've named a special prosecutor, but it was a nice try. Donald Trump doesn't think the way regular people think. My guess is he said, if I run and they indict me, I will yell bloody murder, that they went after me because I'm running, not just running for president, but against Joe Biden, who says he's running. He's not going to run, but who says he's running. Yeah, I think that was a big factor.
In another part of, again, I found this interesting. You actually wrote about this a little bit in your column the other day, but the media reception Trump got from right-wing media outlets, even a lot of people who've been very defensive of him in the media, including people even on Fox. We go back. I have seen people like Mark Thiessen, Ben Dominique, Brit Hume. These are all people that I know you have a little bit different feeling on Brit Hume than I do, but I do see him as someone who was very defensive of Trump, more so than I would have guessed, through his term in office. But they're much more strong, coming out strongly against, but sort of returning to their never Trump roots. And you talked about the New York Post. Maybe for people who hadn't seen that, maybe you could describe that New York Post front page the day after Trump
I
announced.
think it's one of the great headlines of all time. This is the conservative New York Post, and their front page is a cover. And Donald Trump's face wasn't on the cover. It said at the very bottom of the front page, Florida man announces candidacy, page 26. That's Rupert Murdoch sending a message, a not so unsubtle message that says, I'm washing my hands of you, Donald Trump. And Rupert Murdoch owns the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News. If Rupert Murdoch has jumped ship, that gives a lot of people in other places the liberty to do things they wouldn't have done earlier. I think at Fox, for instance, I don't think there's a written memo, but when the chairman or president, whatever she is, Suzanne Scott, says, respect the audience, what does that mean? Don't tell the audience anything it doesn't want to hear. And as long as we believe the audience is made up of Trump fanatics, don't say anything bad about Donald Trump. Well, now they've got the big guy, Rupert Murdoch, saying it's okay to say bad things about Donald Trump, and we're going to get more of it. Not from everybody. Not from everybody. Some people, when Sean Hannity turns on his close personal friend Donald Trump, then we know the ball game is over. But I'm not holding my breath on that. I don't think that'll happen, actually.
No, I would be very surprised by that. I know that, and I saw it online later that right after the announcement, or I think it was maybe during the announcement, Hannity had on Mike Huckabee, who was there to state that this was the greatest speech ever made, and all this stuff. That Trump's unbeatable, all this stuff. I think part of that might have to do with Huckabee's been selling that Trump children's book for a while. He might have a lot of extra copies. He's still trying to unload.
He should be charged with child abuse for doing that. I mean,
That's,
Donald Trump is a man, whatever you think of him, you want to vote for him, that's fine, not you, John. I don't tell people how to vote, and I understand why people do vote for him. But he tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power. It's one thing if Joe Blow says, I don't care, I want to vote for him. But Mike Huckabee is pitching a children's book about a man who tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power, the first president in the United States' entire history that tried to do that. Mike Huckabee should be ashamed of himself. Ashamed of himself. I would tell him that to his face if I ran into him. I'm not going to run into him. We travel in different circles, but I find him to be one of the more pathetic Trump toadies out there.
and oddly, yeah, there's actually there's other people that have made children's books for him too. But we'll move on from Trump. We wanted
Hold
to
on,
talk about.
John, one more thing.
Sure.
I don't want the Democrats to think we're giving them a free pass. They have
Oh
an
no.
unhealthy relationship with Donald Trump. They're counting on Donald Trump crazy, whether it's his crazy or his supporters crazy, to get by, to win elections. And by having this unhealthy codependency with Donald Trump, they're not looking at their own problems. The voters don't like what Democrats stand on crime, on the southern border, on inflation, on the woke culture, on education. The voters don't like Democrats. They didn't embrace Democrats. They rejected people who are looking in the rearview mirror to 2020. But Democrats are, if they're lazy, if they say, well, we got this made, as long as Donald Trump's around, we don't have to look inward. That's a big mistake. They may pay a price for that.
No, and they did in 2016 too. I mean, they wanted him to win, the primary. They were very happy when he did because they saw him as an easy pickoff, and they very much underestimated the unpopularity of Hillary Clinton. They thought that she was just normal enough that she would have no problem winning, but that wasn't the case.
And they may be underestimating their own party's unpopularity now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I just, yeah, yeah. No, it's crazy. I've heard a few prominent Democrats already allude to this idea that they really want to see Trump win the primary, and I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Just, I don't know. I get it, but it's at the same time they should have learned something after 2016. So, last thing, the Republicans, like I said, they're about to hold the House majority again. They've already announced their number one agenda item, and that's to investigate Hunter Biden and any possible links between his shady business dealings and potentially his father, the president. Does this make sense to you as a major priority item, and do you think it's politically smart?
Let me answer your question with a question of my own. What if they hold hearings and there's no smoking gun, no bank records indicating he gave money to his father? Let's say there's no conclusion to the hearings, just as there's no conclusion to all the hearings they hold. Okay? What are voters going to say? Are voters going to say, well, I'm glad those Republicans held a hearing into Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden? But what happened? What's the conclusion? Nobody's getting charged with anything. And by the way, it's not a crime to use your father's name, even if he's the vice president running for president, even if he's the president, to use your father's name to get sweetheart deals. It's sleazy, it's smarmy, but it's not illegal. This story has only interested me to the extent that Joe Biden is involved in anything. And unless we hear that he is, I don't know how politically wise it will be for Republicans to look into Hunter Biden's dealings. They have to, they have a slim majority. The Freedom Caucus is going to demand it. If Kevin McCarthy, the speaker, the future speaker, doesn't give them what they want, he's going to have his hands full for 2 years. I get it. I'm not at all sure it's a good move, though. And if they go a step further, if they get crazy and try to impeach Joe Biden, I will make my second rare prediction. They are done in 2024.
Yeah, so this might surprise some people, since I'm not sure I've ever written a column about Hunter Biden, but I honestly I don't really have a problem with Hunter being investigated. Like you said, I don't think it's politically smart. Not that a investigation needs to be. There are other times people could say, that Benghazi wasn't politically smart. Maybe I think it probably was, but I do think there was a reason to investigate. I just feel that if the GOP is intent on investigating something, there are so many more serious things. If they want to investigate the withdrawal from Afghanistan, what happened there, I think that's a good idea. If they want to go out more into depth over the origins of COVID, see what I feel like there's some good things, but coming right out of the gate after Hunter Biden, just like you said, it strikes me as fan service for the base. They want to get Hunter's been enemy number two for a while, And I think most people, outside of the base, the hardcore base, they just look at this and they kind of roll their eyes, and they come away, reaffirming that the GOP is no more serious of a party than the Democratic Party.
Let me try to think out loud as I say this. Cable news and politicians have something in common. Cable news doesn't appeal to moderate viewers. Cable news appeals to I'll call them extremists. I don't mean that. I'm not calling them a basket of deplorables or anything.
Right.
People with strong political views. At Fox, there's strong political anti-Joe Biden views, okay? When politicians do the same thing and appeal to the extreme, to the loudest voices, they make a mistake because most people aren't at the extreme, either the right or the left. The reason cable news has a relatively small audience is because they do appeal to a fringe. If politicians appeal to a fringe, they can't win general elections. They can win primary elections, but not general elections. General elections require taking in voters who are extreme, moderate, and even win some people from the other side. When politicians behave the way cable news behaves, it's a big mistake.
No, I agree.
Does that
I
make
agree.
sense? You follow what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's it's everybody's. I feel like both sides are just way too far focused on their bases. They want to rally the base all the time, and it's just to those of us who aren't part of the far left or far right, it's frustrating, and it's
Well, in the case of Donald Trump and looking forward, if politicians are afraid to challenge Donald Trump, they may get in the race, but they don't want to say anything bad about Donald Trump. I understand that because they don't want to turn off that 20 or 30%, whatever that percentage is, that will sit home on election day if Donald Trump doesn't get the nomination. They need to win them over. But leaders lead. Leaders, this is why I'm a fan of Chris Christie, because he says you have to tell Donald Trump supporters he did a lot of good things, but if we nominate him, we are electing a Democratic president. That may not be true because Democrats have a weak bench, as I say. But Donald Trump may be the worst candidate they could nominate. Let me go through a list. I made a list here of potential candidates. Tim Scott of South Carolina, Marco Rubio of Florida, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Glenn Youngkin, good candidate, Doug Ducey, Ron DeSantis. This is a strong bench. Who do the Democrats have on their bench? Who? I mean, who?
I'll give you one name. I'll give you one name that I think Jared Polis, my governor in Colorado. I would not be surprised if he's in. I don't know if he'll get any steam, but he's sort of an interesting guy. He's far left on some things, but he's libertarian on others. I think he handled COVID better than most governors did for sure. But yeah, he's getting a lot of attention. He might be one name that I can think of, but you're right. There's not a big bench.
Well, Republicans have everything going for them, and they could nominate a person who's got a perfect track record. Donald Trump. He loses every time he touches something, except in 2016. Except in 2016.
Right.
But you can't make a first impression a second time around or a third time around in this case. People know him by now. They didn't know him in 2016, and they understandably were willing to take a chance. Suburban voters, moderate voters, swing voters, women voters, they're not going to take a chance on him again. And even a bad Democratic candidate might be able to beat him.
Yeah, no, that seems like the biggest, the best talking point that any Trump rivals in the primary have is the winning factor. I feel like a lot of other things should be obvious too, but as far as courting the base, I think the winning the winning factor is the big one that's going to be used. I would have thought January 6th would have just been the big one. But no, when you're talking to the base, when you realize you have to appeal to people who are very much Trump supporters, I feel like the winning factor is that's the best argument any of them are going to have.
I remember, because it was only like the day before yesterday, that Republicans didn't like victims, right?
Yeah.
Stop looking in the rearview mirror, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I don't want to hear about your victimhood. Just get it done, right? That was the
Right.
Republican mantra.
Oh yeah.
And I,
Rugged
and I,
individualism. Yeah.
and I like that kind of thinking.
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
like people getting their power from being victims. What did Donald Trump say in his rambling, long, low key, low energy announcement? I'm a victim.
Yeah.
And this is why I keep getting crazy about his supporters. Don't they see the obvious? He's a victim. He's playing the victim card. He's doing everything that his most loyal supporters hate about Democrats. Let's look at it this way. This will be my final word. Let's look at it this way. Let's assume Barack Obama lost his election in 2012,
12.
right? Lost his reelection. And he said, I really won. The election was rigged. And he tells his vice president, Joe Biden, to go out there and try to stop the electoral count. He calls a rally in Washington, D.C., and eggs on his supporters with lies about how the Republicans stole the election right out from under Barack Obama. And there's a riot and they storm the Capitol, and he supports a whole bunch of candidates in the midterm elections whose only claim to fame is that they agree with Barack Obama that the election was stolen, and they get wiped out in the midterms. What would Republicans be saying about Barack Obama? Say the same thing about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Don't be a
Exactly.
hypocrite. For the few of you out there who are listening who still support him no matter what, I don't want to hear that you'll vote for him if he's running against Kamala Harris. Fine, no problem. Do what you want. But you would be yelling the loudest if Barack Obama pulled what Donald Trump pulled. And you're making believe it's no big deal when Donald Trump pulled it. I have no respect for that. None.
And it's I'll say one thing that's encouraging, writing for your website. A lot of people read my columns and comment on them, and I hear from a lot of these people that were pretty hardcore Trumpers for the entire 4 years. I would say even 6 years, really up until the midterms. I am a little bit encouraged. I'm seeing a lot of these people are saying it is time to move on. It is, that they're Ron DeSantis fans. They see that he's the future of the party. So it is good to see that. I don't know, you see the poll numbers changing too, closer to Ron DeSantis than to Trump. That's good too. I'm surprised it's taken this long, but it does look like things may be headed in the right direction. So we'll
If
see.
Donald Trump wants to sandbag the Republican Party, all he has to do is stay in the race, because his 20 or 30%, we saw what happened in 2016.
Yeah.
Everybody split the vote and Donald Trump got what was left.
Yeah.
9 candidates or whatever the number was split the vote. 10%, 11%, 3%, 5%, and Donald Trump got the biggest single plurality of votes.
Yeah.
It can happen again.
Oh yeah, it can. And I think, you look back at what happened before, and there were people in 2016 that stayed in way too long. John Kasich was one of them, obviously. But yeah, it's just, I think you're right. I hear some people say that this needs to be a Trump versus DeSantis contest from the beginning. I'm more in your camp. I don't think it needs to be from the beginning, but I think when people are seeing that they aren't getting the traction, they do need to get out and shrink up that field as quickly as they can, because I think that's going to make a big difference. But I do think everybody who wants to. Again, I would be more comfortable with maybe 6 people running initially, not 17 like we had in 2016. But yeah, I think you're right. I think everybody has to come in, sort of put the country first, decide that, if we're not catching on, if we're not going anywhere, we need to get out and support someone else, who's still in there.
You know why Fox primetime people aren't going to turn on Donald Trump in a strong, direct way? Laura Ingraham did a little bit. It's in my column. You could read it, where she said, if a candidate makes it about himself, we shouldn't support that candidate. Well, that was a shot at Donald Trump. But you know why, by and large, there are still a lot of people on Fox who won't say a bad word about Donald Trump because they know they'll lose their audience. Their audience gets angry at that. And it may be temporary that they'll go to Newsmax or someplace before they come back. But they don't, ratings are their lifeblood. They get low ratings, they may get replaced. They'll support Donald Trump to the bitter end.
Yeah, if it looks like the momentum is in that direction, I absolutely agree. I think they'll hang on until it's
Unless
over.
Rupert Murdoch flat out, publicly says we can't support Donald Trump, then even the primetime crew will say, am I on safe ground if I support Donald Trump? It's going to take Rupert Murdoch, who again owns Fox, the Wall Street Journal, and the Post, New York Post. If Trump loses Murdoch, he loses a whole lot of media. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's probably a good place to go ahead and wrap it up. I wanted to thank everybody as usual, especially with tomorrow being Thanksgiving. Wanted to wish you all happy Thanksgiving with friends and family, whatever you do. We always appreciate having you here. Please leave a comment below if you have any suggestions for us or anything else. Bernie, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, have a great Thanksgiving, John, and everybody listening. And one piece of advice, keep the politics to a minimum.
On Thanksgiving, gotcha. That's good advice. Good advice. All right, Bernie, you have a great day.
You too, John.